Thank you so much for taking an interest in this video. You are going to learn how to build custom Alexa skills. Just to let you know, this is part of my upcoming masterclass for Alexa. If you want to know more about it, make sure to subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell so that you're always in the loop. And also check out the links down below to my blog and the sign-up form so that you are completely in the loop of all the awesome content that is coming soon. Have a good one and enjoy the video. Welcome to the first coding section. In this section, we will create a skill named Mr. Boring. And as you may have already inferred by the name, it is not very exciting when it comes to the user experience. However, the point of this section is to get our feet wet with the Ask SDK and put into practice some of the theory we learned in the last section. I cannot wait to see you succeed in this first coding section. So let's get started right away. Hey guys, so unfortunately, during the time that it took me to edit and record all of this videos for this specific section, it seems like somebody went ahead and published an actual Mr. Boring skill. Again, like I'm gonna say in a future video, this idea was not my original idea, and I mean, it really is really boring. I went ahead and I attended one of those Amazon office hours where they showcase a skill like this, where we just get a boring fact. And the idea of this section is for you to just get the grasp of the basics, of the fundamentals. So this seemed like a very awesome skill to get started with, because we're not really focused so much on the user experience as much as we just want to get down the fundamentals and how the SDK works and all that good stuff. Now, the problem with that is that it seems like the person that published the skill actually used the same invocation name that I'm using to show you in the next following set of videos. And it makes sense. Probably that person went ahead and attended the same session that I did and decided, hey, why not publish it? Let's just go ahead and do so. So I'm actually expecting some other people to do the same thing and just publish the same boring skill. So in order for you guys to not have trouble when you're testing this skill, which is weird because I would think that the Alexa team would have make sure that there's restrictions that don't allow us to use the same invocation name that somebody else did in their skill. So because we're using the same invocation name as probably, you will use the same invocation name as probably the published skill, I suggest changing the invocation name. Instead of Mr. Boring, maybe something like Boring King or Boring Dude or something like that, so that when it comes time for you to test it, you're not conflicting with the actual boring skill that is in the marketplace. Again, this is just a small caveat. I'm sure you guys are smart enough to change the invocation name and make sure that all the sample utterances that you use when you're testing use your invocation name. It just makes sense. Again, this is a really short section just outlining the simple and the fundamentals of the SDK. So I didn't want to have to re-record all the lessons and use a different invocation name. But just as an advice, please don't use Mr. Boring. Use a different invocation name. Hey guys, welcome back. So in the previous lessons, we've been looking a lot at the theory behind Alexa, how it works, what are sample utterances and intents and all that stuff. And now we're ready to dive in and develop our first skill. So it's going to be a very basic skill. And before we jump into the actual code, what is recommended by Amazon is to actually script out the skill, just write out in a piece of paper or in a notepad the scripts, what you think the user is going to say, or what you want the user to say, and what Alexa is going to respond. So there's different things that go into a script, but I'm going to keep it really simple with the things that we know, like the sample utterances and the intents. And we're just going to outline the happy paths and the help path. They could be some other different scripts, but I just want to keep it focused and short, just so that you can actually get your feet wet. So I'm using Balsamic here for wireframing. By the way, I'm going to include all of this for free, all of these templates in the resource section so that you can get access to them. You can modify them if you want. And I'm also going to include the JSON, which is going to help you if you, I'm using the desktop version of Balsamic, but if you have like the cloud version and you want to use the same template, the JSON, you can actually import the JSON into your cloud instance and have the same template. So look for that in the resource if that's something that's of interest to you. So here what I'm doing is I'm outlining the happy path. I script the happy path. So we're gonna make a skill called Mr. Boring, and full disclaimer, this is not my skill. This is a super beginner friendly skill that was actually the idea was actually made by Amazon. I attended one of their office hours a long time ago, and this was the skill that they showcased for beginners, so that beginners can actually write some code. In essence, what you're doing is you're asking Mr. Boring, which is the name of the skill, for a fact, and it would give you a really boring fact. So for example, this is our user, this happy face represents our user. So in essence, what the user would say is, Alexa, open Mr. Boring and give me a boring fact or something like that, and Alexa would respond. In this case, in this wireframe, what I have is, Alexa, open Mr. Boring. That's the script the user is going to say. Here, the sample utterance is open Mr. Boring, which in turn, it launches a launch request. That's it. So that opens up the skill. Alexa is going to say, hi, I'm Mr. Boring. You can ask me to give you a fact. It's going to keep the request open, the session open, and then we can say, give me a fact. Sample utterances being, give me a fact, tell me a fact, give me a boring fact, tell me a boring fact, tell me something, entertain me. That's just what I came up with. And this in turn will trigger a get fact intent, which Alexa will respond something like, wow, you won't believe this, but 1 + 1 is equal to 2. Something super boring or super obvious that, it doesn't really matter. The point of this is just to have fun and to start understanding really how to use the developer console, the Alexa SDK, and all that good stuff. Now, the extreme happy path would be an experienced user, which uses the invocation name of the skill and right there ask for us for a fact. So Alexa, ask Mr. Boring for a fact. This user has probably used the skill before or read the instructions, and instead of just opening the skill, is actually triggering an intent, the get fact intent, with the different utterances that he or she can say, which Alexa will respond. The same boring thing. We can also wireframe the help script, which this would be, for example, a user that has no idea what your skill does and never read the instructions in the skill market, and just goes like, oh, Alexa, open Mr. Boring. Alexa will greet you, hi, I'm Mr. Boring, you can ask me to give you a fact. And the user can say, I need help, or help me. Sure, I can help you. Just say, give me a fact, so I can give you a boring fact, right? That here, right here, I need help, help me, you can help, can you help me? Those are the sample utterances that you can use for the Amazon that help intent. And notice this is something interesting that we haven't talked about, and I'm gonna discuss this in a future lesson, but this intent actually has the word Amazon that help intent, and that's because there's something called the built-in intents. And again, we're gonna dive deep into this later. Again, okay, now the Amazon goes, yeah, I can give you a fact. User understands, ask for a fact, give me a fact, please. We already saw this. And again, Alexa responds with the boring fact. Great. So these are probably the shortest scripts that we're going to see in this course. Again, this is the purpose of this is to focus on the basics of how to use the Alexa SDK, how to use lambdas, how to create our skills in the console. So let's go right into it. I'll see you guys in the next lesson. Okay guys, so let's get started writing our first skill. First thing you're going to do is you're going to log in, of course, into your Alexa developer console. And once you're there, hit the create skill button. First and most important, make sure that you enter the name of your skill. Remember, our skill's name is Mr. Boring. Then in here, let's just leave English as a default language. That's where I'm at. Well, I guess you could select whatever language you want to use if you're in a different location. I'm going to leave the default English US. In here, there is different kind of skills, as you can see. And here, this is the Alexa Masterclass for custom skills. If you're interested in other kind of skills, Flash, Briefing, Smart Home, any other kind of skills, do let me know, because at the time of this recording, Alexa is a very bleeding edge tech, and not a lot of people still know about it. I'm one of the early adopters, to be honest with you. I love it. As much as I love it, I think that I want to build something that is valuable to my audience, valuable to the students that want to learn. And I want to make sure that you guys are getting what you deserve. So I'm focusing this masterclass just on custom skills. We're going to go dive deep into custom skills. If you're interested in any other kind of skills, do let me know. And if it does get enough traction, I will promise you I will make a separate course on those other kind of skills. So for now, every single time we create a skill, we're going to select custom skills. Now here, if you scroll down, it's asking you also, how do you want to host your backend? Your skill is just, think of it like a web app, but instead of having a user interface, you have a voice interface, and everything is driven by your voice. You have different options here. You can provision your own, which we're going to do this when we're a little bit more advanced. For now, go ahead and select the Alexa hosted option for Node.js. Remember, this course is also geared to Node.js developers. If you're interested in a Python version of this course, also do let me know. Send me an email, write some comments, Q&A, and anywhere that you can get a hold of me in my social media platforms, my blog. Send me an email with whatever you're interested in, whether it be a separate kind of skills or another custom skill masterclass based in Python. And I promise you, I will make the time to do it. So let's go ahead and just review. Mr. Boring is the name, default language, custom, Alexa hosted. Go ahead and hit the create skill button. Now, as you can see, it's saying that it's provisioning AWS resources. And well, while we wait for this to finish, let me actually tell you a little bit about why I selected the hosted skill option. And this is going to get us started really fast without us having to manually host our code, our backend. In our case, and in most of the official way would be to actually log in into your AWS account and set up a Lambda skill that is going to take care of the computing of your skill. You know, everything is hosted in the cloud, everything is AWS nowadays. So, but here I selected a hosted on purpose because it's the fastest way for you to get up and running. You don't have to be switching back and forth between an Alexa developer console and your AWS account. And Amazon takes care of managing everything automatic, everything, of course, within the free tier. So it is really the fastest way to get up and running with Alexa. Let's carry on. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the invocation tab. And in here, as you can see, Alexa already tried to infer what kind of invocation name you want. And it's getting better. It's getting pretty good at it. But I remember back in the day when this was just coming out, it wasn't that great. And even recognizing when you were saying the invocation name to Alexa was pretty tough. So call me paranoid or whatever you want, but I like to, for example, the titles, I like to put them in full form whenever possible. Guys, the invocation name is really important. I know I said this before, but it is the word or the phrase that your users are going to link to your skill, is what is going to get burned into their minds whenever they think about your skill. Oh yeah, Mr. Boring. Oh yeah. So make sure you pick something that makes sense with what the purpose of your skill. For in our case, this is the very first skill we're creating. So Mr. Boring is fine. Not a lot of thought process went into it, but that's okay. Again, we're focusing on just learning the basics, the fundamentals. So make sure you save the model. And then after that, make sure you build the model. And awesome, we got a full build successful. So we can go ahead and carry on. Great. So now that we have our skill set up in our developer console, let's actually go ahead and let's start writing the code for our launch request. It just makes sense because think about it. When a new user enables the skill, most of the time they really don't read the instructions and they just ask Alexa, and makes sense. I mean, after all, we are creating a voice experience. You know, they don't want to be reading stuff. They just want to talk to Alexa and they want Alexa to handle everything for them. So let's make sure that our launch request is properly set up. So here back in our developer console, let's go ahead and let's jump into the code. Okay, here in our code, we're prompted with a text editor. And what I want you to do right now is don't even look at the starting code, just select it all and delete it. Trust me, we're gonna go step by step and I don't want you to get confused. I really want you to understand the basics and the fundamentals. And if we did not have a hosted skill, you wouldn't have access to this. You would get like a different window saying that, hey, you gotta connect this skill to your own hosted endpoint. But since we selected our hosted skill in Node.js, we have this access to this very nice text editor. It's half decent. It's not a full-blown IDE, but it's good enough. Again, if you want to start using Visual Studio Code or a separate text editor, of course, I highly encourage you to do so. It's honestly, it's what I do. I don't really use this. And I just wanted to briefly touch again on what comes with a hosted skill. As you can see down here, we do get Amazon CloudWatch for the logs, and that comes in handy for debugging our skill. Then we have S3 for storage, and you have more documentation if you want to go ahead and read that. All right, so let's get started with the code. Again, this is a Node.js course. I know I've said it quite a few times already, but if you're not familiar with JavaScript or with Node, make sure you're looking in the resources section, because I do have links to some tutorials that are going to guide you through the very basic code of JavaScript, you know, for loops, variables, functions, all that really basic stuff. But I'm assuming that at this point you're familiar with all that stuff. So let's get right into it. And the first thing we're gonna do with like any Node.js application, we're actually gonna make sure that we are calling. We're gonna be using the require function so that we get Alexa, well, ask SDK. And after that, what we're going to do is we're going to declare a constant, and we're going to call this the launch request handler. So the way the skill works is every intent, every request is we pretty much what we're going to do is we're going to declare constant for those, and that constant is actually going to be an object. Inside that object, there's two very important pieces of information, which they're functions. One of them is called the can handle function, and the other one is the handle function. Both of this take one parameter, and that parameter, we're going to call it the handler input. And remember how when we went over the structure of a request and a response, there was the JSON that I showed you had information about when a user was talking to Alexa, like all the information, like for the request, like the intent, you know, whether it was a launch request or the kind of intent, again, like stop, continue, yes, no, all that good stuff that gets passed into these two functions. So the first function, the can handle function, is actually going to return a Boolean value. And what we want to do in this function is we actually want to check for the kind of request or an intent that the user is requesting. If this function is returns true, it means that the user is requesting for this specific constant, this specific, whether it be a request or an intent. Once it determines that yes, this can handle the request of the user, then it calls the handle function, and this is where the really the meat and potatoes of the request, the logic comes in. So for a launch request, the way you do that would be return, because we have to return the Boolean value, is handler input, which is our parameter. We're going to get access to the request envelope. That request envelope has the actual request, and that has a type. If this type is equal to a launch request, then, only then, is when this handle function is going to get executed. So let's go ahead and put our code right here. The first thing we want to do is we want to declare another constant, because since it is the launch request, really it's never going to change. And what I mean by that is the speak output. So this is what Alexa is going to say to our user when the user goes, hey, Alexa, open up Mr. Boring. So let's go ahead and let's put welcome to Mr. Make sure you can put that long form, short form, whatever you want to try. Welcome to Mr. Boring. I am pretty boring. You can ask me for a boring fact. So this is the constant, this is the text that we want Alexa to say out loud to our user. So how do we actually go ahead and we ask Alexa to say it? Well, we return actually the same handler input has a response builder. And that response builder has a method called speak. To this speak method, we want to pass in our text that we want Alexa to say. So we're going to head and we're going to put it in there. And now let's think about this. We want to have the session open because we're waiting for input from the user. We don't just want to grid them and be like, hey, I'm Mr. Boring, and then close the skill and never continue the interaction, right? So there's another method that we want to chain to this. It is called the reprompt method. And in here, normally it's like if a user, for example, here Alexa, we have her say, you can ask me for a boring fact, and it stays there and it's listening for input from the user. But if the user doesn't ever say anything, that's where the reprompt will trigger after a few seconds of Alexa not detecting the user saying anything, and it will repeat whatever, or it will say whatever you pass into this function. So for our case, let's go ahead and pass in the same greeting. And the last thing we want to do to actually return a response is get response, which is another method. Let's make sure we save our code. And now in here, with this, just with this code alone is not going to work. We still need to do something else. And if you notice, here I'm requiring the SDK, but I'm not really using it yet. So let's go ahead and make sure we use it. What we want to do is we want to export, because we want to make sure that we are passing all of this information, or whenever we actually hit a constant, our endpoint, we want to make sure to build a response, but we want to make sure to return that to the actual Alexa. So in here, we're going to use Alexa that skill builders that custom, because we're using a custom skill. And this is where we actually we register our event handlers per se. So remember how I told you that every intent, every request is going to be represented by a constant object. This is just the setup, but we actually have to register them so that Alexa knows how to, when a user is asking for a launch request, Alexa goes into here, into the add request handlers. This takes multiple parameters, as many as you want your skill to be able to handle. And it goes through every single one of those until it finds a match where the can handle function returns a true. And then the order in where you register your handlers is very important, because Alexa literally goes one by one checking the can handle function. And the first instance where that function returns a true, that is the code that is going to get executed. So make sure that you take really good care of the order of your request handlers. So let's go ahead and let's register our launch request handler. We pass it in here. And then after that, you're just going to call the Lambda. And in here, sorry, this is exports. And there you go. Perfect. Let's go ahead and save this. And let's deploy our code. So saving is one thing. Saving just makes sure it persists your changes to the code, but then we have to deploy it. And what deploy means is we actually push this code into the Lambda that AWS is hosting for us and is managing for us. So that got deployed, that was successful. And if you notice, there's a promote to live here, but you can't use this because our skill is not published yet. The only way we can use this is if we ever publish our hosted skill, and then in the future we want to update our code. We come, we do changes, we save, we deploy, we test that everything is good and nice, and then we promote to live. I'm still doubting about whether I'm going to show you this or not. Probably will, just so that you get the full experience. But again, most of the time I find myself 99% of the time building skills that I host on my own AWS account, not a hosted skill by Amazon themselves. Anyway, so with this code deployed, let's see if this is going to work with our device. So I'll see you guys in the next lesson. Okay, so last time around, we actually deployed our code to our hosted Lambda. So let's go ahead and let's test it. Up here in the test tab, by default, test is disabled. Not sure why, but just make sure that you select development from the dropdown. That will enable us to be able to use this handy little tool, and where you could actually talk to it if you want. But if you're kind of lazy like me, you don't really want to talk, you can just actually type in open Mr. Boring.
Welcome to Mr. Boring. I am pretty boring. You can ask me for a boring fact.
It's just that simple, guys. Really, developing an Alexa skill is making sure you're setting up the correct handlers to handle your request, your intents, with along, of course, with the combination of the sample utterances and slots and all that good stuff that you use to make sure that you create an awesome voice user interface. And here, this little tool, what I like about it is that it really tells you a lot of information that is helpful. Here you see the JSON input, which is what pretty much what gets generated when the user makes a request. And here's the JSON output, which is what we ask Alexa to say, or is what our Lambda is giving Alexa, and Alexa knows how to interpret that. Really, at the end of the day, what's important is here, and don't worry about this SSML. This is something that we're also going to dive deep into it. And as you can see, that's the text that we asked Alexa to say in our launch request. For the future, this little tool gives you a screen representation of how, devices like the Echo Show or any other device that has, even your phone that has a screen, it will give the capability or it will mimic what a screen will look like for your skill. And this comes useful when you're using cards, or where you want to maybe you want to output some sort of text. But again, remember, this is just like an addition. It's the focus of a skill is not really the screen. The screen is more like to enhance it a little bit, but the focus of an Alexa skill is the voice interface. Of course, don't worry about it. We're going to go also into detail with cards and all that good stuff that we can put in the screen here. So let's go ahead and let's continue developing our skill. Okay guys, so last time around we make sure that our code was working in the current state. What I want to do in this video is actually continue to develop the skill, and we're gonna get started with making another constant, and this one's gonna represent our get boring fact intent. So let's call this get boring fact handler. Remember, all of these handlers, they're just objects with two functions: the can handle function and the actual handling of the function. Both take the same input, the handler input as a parameter. Now here, this one's going to be a little bit different, because we're not just going to make sure we're not just going to check for the request type, but we're also going to be checking for the actual intent. That's because here what we're going to do, and let me just, I'm kind of lazy, so let me copy paste this code. So this one, what we're going to make sure is not a launch request, because we're past that. What we want to make sure we compare it to is an intent request. But that's not the only thing though, because intents, there could be many intents for your skill, right? And our skill is really, really simple, but even then, you gotta make sure that Alexa knows the specific intent that you want to handle with this specific handler. So we want to make sure that our request type is an intent request. We want to make sure that the request, that intent, that name is equal to our intent, which in this case, is we want to handle the get boring fact. So we want to make sure that this is equal to get boring fact intent. Only if these two conditions are met, we're going to return true, and Alexa is going to go into our handle function. Here inside our handle function, let's make it very simple to start with. Again, let's declare our constant speech output, and this is the boring fact that we want Alexa to say. Oh yeah, our wireframe, I remember, had the 1 plus 1 equals 2. So let's I'm using, by the way, the backticks in JavaScript for this is useful for string interpolation, but I'm not really using any string interpolation here. But I did want to use a single quote. I guess I could use double quotes, but anyway, you won't believe this, but 1 + 1 = 2. That's what I want Alexa to say to our users whenever they ask for a boring fact. Now, you already know what's coming next. We're going to use the same code as before. We're going to make use of our handler input, the response builder. Then we're going to call the speak method. And we're going to pass our speak output. Now, let's think about this one. For now, I want to keep it simple. We could potentially make this skill to say to have a no and yes intent, so that whenever we give them a fact, we could probably ask, you know what, do you want to hear another one? Do you listen to us another one? And the user could say yes or no, and we could keep the skill going forever. But let's not do that. Let's keep it very simple. And let's just get the response. That way, whenever the user asks for a request, asks for a boring fact, Alexa is going to give them a boring fact, and that's it. That's the end of the skill. Let's make sure to register our event, our handler, because if we do not register it, it's not gonna know, and it's giving me an issue because it's not that is handler. There you go. So we're registering our get boring fact handler here. We have make sure that we register the launch request. Let's save our code. Very important part, but also just as important, let's make sure that we deploy it. Okay, deployment successful. Let's go ahead and let's test this. What do you guys think is going to happen when we ask for a boring fact? So let's open Mr. Boring.
Welcome to Mr. Boring. I am pretty boring. You can ask me for a boring.
Okay, so now if we ask for a fact, what do you guys think is going to happen? Give me a fact.
There was a problem with the requested skills response.
Can you guys guess why that's happening? And by the way, I totally did this on purpose. And that is because even though our code has our get boring fact and we register it, there is one really important thing that has to happen, and that's in the build section. We have to actually register our intent. Here you can see we have a default hello world intent. We don't need that. You can delete that. And this mistake, by the way, again, I made it completely on purpose because it's something that beginners really struggle with. Either they actually register the intent here and don't fully register in the code, or vice versa, like we just did. We coded for it. We registered it in the Lambda expression, but we never actually registered it here. So let's go ahead and do that. Now the name of the intent, this name has to match what's in the code. Or well, if you created this first, the code has to match what the name that we give it. So if I remember correctly, it was get boring fact. Let's go ahead and make sure that's what it will save the model. And let's go ahead and let's check that it was get boring fact. Yes. Okay, so in the build, let's get boring fact intent. Here is where we actually put our sample utterances. And let's go back and let's look at the wireframe. What was it that we said? Give me a fact, tell me a fact, all that good stuff. All right, so give me a fact. Tell me a fact. We have give me a boring fact, tell me a boring fact, give me a boring fact, tell me a boring fact. And then tell me something. And then entertain me. Cool, I think that's good enough. So now we save the model, importing, and then again importing, make sure we build the model, make sure that we didn't break anything. Cool, the quick build was successful. And by the way, if you notice, this is a training model. If you're not familiar with any of AI, I'm not an expert in AI, but what I do know is that there's something called models in AI, and they get trained, they get fed huge amounts of data, and that's why the code is able to infer or able to detect, depending on the situation. In our case, is able to understand that for this specific get boring fact intent, these are the sample utterances that we want. And Alexa even goes as far as to like try to infer if the user says something that is closely related to one of these phrases, even though it's not exactly the same phrase. The AI model gets trained in that, and it tries to infer that is, the user wants to trigger the get boring fact intent. And because it's been a few years, Amazon has been training the engine and the models a lot. It's getting really good. So let's go ahead and let's try again. Let's try to test this one more time.
Welcome to Mr. Boring. I am pretty boring. You can ask me for a boring fact.
Give me a fact.
You won't believe this, but 1 + 1 = 2.
You have built, I want to say, half of your first custom skill. Good job. Okay, guys, so good job so far. We've done a good amount of work in this first skill. We got our boring fact handler set up last time around, and it's a little bit too boring, to be honest with you. I get it. This is meant to be a boring skill, but if you notice here, we're hard coding the fact, and it's just one. What if we wanted to have multiple facts? Well, let's spice things up a little bit. Let's make use of an array. I'm gonna call it facts. And let me go ahead and I'm gonna paste the facts that I found online. And yes, I found them online. I couldn't come up with anything boring. I don't got time to be thinking about boring stuff. In all seriousness, I just couldn't think of anything. So I just went online, did a quick Google search, and the first 2 pages had this fact, so I just copy pasted them here. Feel free to do the same, use the same ones that I have, or just come up with your own facts if you want to. So what we're gonna do now is let's create a little function, a little utility function. We're gonna call it get random integer, actually. And this is gonna take one parameter, which is going to be a number, and it's going to be the max, and it's not inclusive. So if you wanted to get, for example, let me put a comment right here, not inclusive, max, not inclusive. There you go. So whenever we call this function, the idea is, for example, if we pass a 5, that's the threshold that we want to get, but not inclusive, not a 5. So it's going to generate any number between a 0 and a 4. The reason why that is going to be useful is because we need to get any random fact from this array, and we don't want to have, like, if we pass the length to this function of an array, we don't want to get for example, in this case, this has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 facts. So if we pass in a number 5 and we get a number 5 out from this function, what do you think is going to happen if we try to access the array at index 5? We're going to get an exception, right? We're going to get out of bounds array exception. So we don't want that to happen. That's why the max is not inclusive. We want to make sure that we just have one less than the max. So the function is gonna look like this: return math that floor. And this is a function that comes, it's a static function that comes from the math object of JavaScript. And inside of this, we're actually going to call math that random to generate any number from 0 to 0.99, I believe. We're going to multiply that times the max. Again, this function is going to make sure that whatever we pass in is going to generate a number between 0 and this number, but this max is not inclusive. I repeat that, it's not inclusive, and we need that to be like that because we don't want to have an array out of bounds exception. If you're not familiar with the math.floor or the math.random, just go ahead and make sure you look them up in Google. Do a quick Google search. We're gonna get all the JavaScript documentation and examples for that. Okay, so now what we want to do is we don't want to hard code the fact that's gonna be outputted. We actually want to access our facts array, and inside we are gonna call the get random integer function that we just created. And guess what we're gonna pass in as a parameter? We're gonna use the facts that length property. So what this is going to allow us to do is generate a random integer from 0 to the max, which is the length of the array. This time around it's 5 because we have 5 items here. But again, the 5 is not inclusive because we don't want to get an array out of bounds error. Let's save the code. Now let's deploy it and let's go ahead and test.
You can't kill yourself by holding your breath.
Nice. One more time.
It is physically impossible for pigs to look up into the sky.
Great. So as you can see, every time we ask for a boring fact, it's just going to randomly generate a number, and it's going to map to an index in the array, giving us a random fact. Good job, guys. Good job, guys, adding dynamic data in the last lesson. So now we don't have that boring 1 + 1 = 2 hard-coded. Now we have an array that holds different facts, and the skill actually gives us a random fact every time a user asks for one. So let's go ahead and implement the help intent. And because if a user right now would come into our skill and really have trouble using it, which it would be really hard because we made it very intuitive. But if for some reason, let's say a user comes and asks for help, our skill is gonna bum out and it's not gonna know what to do. It's gonna be like, hey, you're asking me for an intent that I have no idea what to do with. So let's go ahead and set that up. All right, so here in our code, very straightforward, just as before, we're gonna create a constant, name it help handler. It's going to take the same structure. Inside the object, we're going to have our canHandle function with that one parameter. And in here, we also want to check still that it is an intent request. So we need to make sure that we use our handler input, that request envelope, that request, that type, compare it to an intent request, and we also need to make sure that we are checking for the specific kind of intent. So we're going to use the handler input, that request envelope again, that request, that intent, that name. We want to compare it, and this time we want to make sure that this is Amazon, that help intent. And notice again how this is very specific. It has Amazon all in capitals, that help intent. This is because, again, we're using a built-in intent. It's not a custom one that we generated like this one. We picked this specific name, get boring fact intent, but this is something that Amazon gives us by default. So we want to make sure that we're using the correct string. Otherwise, it's not going to detect that this is the handler for this specific intent. Let's create our handle function. And in here, again, same input, handler input right there. Let's create our constant, which holds our speak output. And in here, again, I chose this. Sure, I can help you. I can give you a boring fact. Just say, give me a fact. You can choose anything that you would like. Now we're going to return the response, and we're going to use our handler input response builder to do so. We're going to call the speak method just as before. We're going to pass in our speak output. And also we want to make sure that we keep the session open, because it doesn't make sense that the user is trying to use their skill, is asking for help, and just to end it. So we want to give a chance to the user to respond, like asking for a fact, or maybe even to repeat, to give, like say help again. So we want to use the reprompt, and we want to pass in our speak output again. And let's make sure that we get the response. Great, so that takes care of the setup of the logic for the help handler. Now, don't forget, make sure to register the handler, otherwise it's not gonna work. Let me just format the code a little bit. Yes, I know I'm kind of picky, but I want the code to be as readable as possible. Perfect, looking good. Let's save the code, let's deploy it. And now let's go and test.
Sure. I can help you. I can give you a boring fact. Just say, give me a fact.
Great. So as you can see, it is giving us the help instructions after I asked for help. And just to recap, we are using here a built-in intent, the Amazon.help intent, which doesn't need any sample utterances because Amazon already gives us those by default. All right, guys, see you in the next video. Okay, guys, so I want to start this video with a little challenge. I think you're ready for it. You see how we have an Amazon.cancel and stop intents? Again, notice the Amazon before the actual name of the intent. That's because those are built-in intents. We already saw how to set up the help intent. So what I want to challenge you with is to actually, set up on your own the cancel and the stop intent. It is really the same concept. Now, the difference though here is that I want you to use the same constant in the code, the same object, to handle both intents. And yes, you can actually do that. You can have the same code handle the cancel intent or the stop intent. And the reason for that is because this is a really simple skill. If we had a more complex skill where the context of the word cancel and the word stop would mean different things, then that would be a good use case to actually have separate handlers for each. But since this is really simple, I'm giving you this tip. Use the same constant, use the same object to handle both the cancel and the stop intent. That's because we want to have our skill stop, just end whenever the user goes like, you know what, just cancel or stop. We want to end the session right there. Go ahead and try it, guys. And if you can't figure it out, don't worry, I'm going to give you my solution. All right, so let's get started with the solution that I came up with. Let's make sure we have a constant here, stop and cancel handler. And for this, we want to, again, same structure for everything. We're going to have our handle, can handle function. I'm just going to copy paste for time's sake. And here is the twist. Instead of just checking for the Amazon stop intent, I'm also want to say or, and let me copy this really quick. Amazon that cancel intent, and maybe to make it a little more readable, let me put some parentheses right there. So here we're checking that the user is actually trying to make an intent request, and also if they have a typo right there, if they have a stop intent or a cancel intent, go ahead and handle it with our handler function. All right, and in here, again, super basic, super simple. Make sure we have our speak output, which is going to read like this. Okay, sorry if I bored you. Bye for now. Let's build the request. Return handler input. That response builder. That speak. Passing our speak output. And let's get the response. Now remember, here we want to just end it. We don't want to keep the session open, because that's the only thing we want to do, is just want to say, okay, bye for now. Register the handler. Let's save it. And whoops, I just noticed here we have another typo. Again, guys, this would have not worked because I had a typo. It has to be exactly what Amazon gives you. So Amazon.cancel intent and Amazon.stop intent. Let's save it. Let's deploy it. And let's test.
Welcome to Mr. Boring. I am pretty boring. You can ask me for a boring fact.
Nope, I don't want a boring fact. Stop.
Okay, sorry if I bored you. Bye for now.
Good job, guys. See you in the next video. So a common question that may arise is, can we add our own utterances to built-in intents? So for example, say that if I wanted to have a key phrase that would trigger help intent other than the ones that Amazon gives us, can we go ahead and do that? The answer is yes. So for example, here in the Amazon.help intent, I added I am clueless. So if you wanted to add your own custom sample utterances on top of what Amazon gives you, you can definitely do that. I added I am clueless. Let's make sure that you save the model and then you build the model. I already did that. So let me show you, if we test this, that it actually does work.
Sure. I can help you. I can give you a boring fact. Just say, give me a fact.
So there you have it, guys. You can totally add your own sample utterances to built-in intents. I really don't find myself doing that often, but if you wanted to add more ways that the user can trigger built-in intents, you can definitely do so. Great job on completing this section, guys. Let's recap. In this section, we created the Mr. Boring skill. Not the most exciting skill, hence its name. However, we got a good grasp of the fundamentals. we made use of the AWS hosted option, which is a good way to quickly set up skills that are not very complex. AWS manages all the backend resources such as the Lambda, the cloud logs, and the storage. We also set up the launch request, the get boring fact intent, and the Amazon.stop and Amazon.cancel built-in intent. Now we have a basic fact skill that works like this. Alexa, ask Mr. Boring to give me a fact.
The students of this course are awesome. See you on the next lesson.
Wow, thank you guys. I cannot thank you enough for sticking to the end of this video. Once again, please, if you like the content, subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit the notification bell so that you're always in the loop. Stay tuned because the full masterclass is coming soon. Cannot wait to see what you guys build.